Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to share something a little different, something that's been on my mind for a while now. I spent 40 years building something I thought would make my family proud, and last year, I discovered they had no idea it even existed. My name is Richard Caldwell. I'm 74 years old, and I learned the hard way that the accomplishment I was most proud of meant absolutely nothing to the people I love most. I was a professor of medieval history at a small liberal arts college in upstate New York for 38 years. Not a particularly glamorous career, not something that impresses people at cocktail parties, but it was my life's work, and I took it seriously. I specialized in 13th century monastic movements, an incredibly narrow field that maybe 50 people in the world care about, and I was one of the leading experts. Over the course of my career, I published extensively. Journal articles, book chapters, conference papers. But my real achievement, the thing I poured 20 years of my life into, was a comprehensive study of Cistercian monasteries in medieval France. It was published by a university press in 2008, a dense academic book running over 600 pages with extensive footnotes and appendices. The kind of book that maybe 300 people will ever read, but those 300 people are the ones who matter in my field. That book was everything to me. It represented 2 decades of research, countless trips to archives in France and England, hundreds of hours translating medieval Latin documents, years of thinking and writing and revising. It was reviewed positively in academic journals. It was cited by other scholars. It became, in its small way, a definitive work on the subject. I kept a copy of it on my desk, and sometimes I'd just look at it and feel this deep sense of satisfaction that I'd created something permanent, something that would outlast me. I retired from teaching in 2015 at the age of 65. By then, I'd been married to my wife Sharon for 42 years, and we had 3 grown children. David, our oldest, was 40 at the time, working as a software engineer in Seattle. Jennifer was 37, a high school counselor in Philadelphia. And Rachel, our youngest, was 34, teaching elementary school in Denver. All of them were doing well, all settled in their own lives with their own families. Sharon and I moved to a smaller house after I retired, something more manageable now that it was just the 2 of us. We traveled a bit, visited the grandkids, settled into the quiet rhythm of retirement. I'd spent so many years consumed by my work, by teaching and research and publishing, that it was strange at first to have nothing but free time. But I adjusted. I read, I took walks. I finally had time to do all the things I'd put off while I was building my career. Last Thanksgiving, all 3 of our kids came home with their families. It was the first time in years we'd all been together. 7 grandchildren ranging from age 4 to 15, the house full of noise and chaos, and the kind of happy exhaustion that comes from having too many people in too small a space. It was wonderful. On Saturday afternoon, most of the adults were in the living room, while the kids played outside. David was showing everyone photos on his phone from a trip his family had taken to Japan. Jennifer was talking about a difficult case she was dealing with at work, a student who was struggling. Rachel was describing a lesson plan she'd developed that had really connected with her 3rd graders. Everyone was engaged, asking questions, sharing their own experiences. At some point, the conversation turned to accomplishments, things people were proud of. David talked about a major project at work, some software system he'd designed that was being used by thousands of people. Jennifer talked about a student she'd counseled who'd been suicidal and was now thriving in college. Rachel talked about a struggling reader in her class who'd finally broken through and was now reading above grade level. I listened to them talk and felt proud. These were my children, doing meaningful work, making real differences in people's lives. And then Rachel turned to me and said, "Dad, what about you? What's something from your career you're really proud of?" It was such a natural question, such an obvious opening for me to talk about my book, about the work I'd devoted 20 years to. I said, "Well, My biggest accomplishment was probably the book I published on Cistercian monasteries. It took me 20 years to research and write, and it's become something of a standard reference in the field. There was a brief silence. Then David said, "Oh, I didn't know you'd written a book." Jennifer said, "Wait, you published a book? When was this?" And Rachel said, "I don't think I ever knew that. What's it about?" I sat there looking at my 3 children, these people I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and realized they had no idea about the thing I'd worked hardest on in my entire life. They didn't know it existed. They didn't know I'd spent 20 years on it. They didn't know it had been published or reviewed or cited. They didn't know anything about the achievement that had defined my professional life and given me the most satisfaction. I tried to explain what the book was about, but I could see their eyes glazing over as I talked about monastic reform movements and Cistercian architecture. They were polite. They asked a few questions, but it was clear they didn't really understand what I'd done or why it mattered. To them, it was just some obscure academic thing their father had worked on, not particularly interesting or relevant to their lives. Later that evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in my study looking at that book on my shelf. I pulled it down and opened it, reading the acknowledgments where I'd thanked Sharon and the kids for their patience during the years I'd been working on it. I'd thanked them for understanding all the nights I'd stayed late at the office, all the weekends I'd spent in the library, all the family events I'd missed because I was chasing down some obscure reference or working on a difficult chapter. And I realized something that felt like a physical blow. While I'd been pouring everything into this work, while I'd been sacrificing time with my family to chase this accomplishment, my kids hadn't been paying attention. They'd been growing up, living their lives, forming their own understanding of who I was. And the thing I was most proud of, the thing I thought would be my legacy, had barely registered for them. I thought about all those nights I'd stayed late at the office instead of coming home for dinner. I thought about the soccer games and school plays I'd missed because I had research to do. I thought about the family vacations where I'd brought my laptop and spent half the time working on the book instead of being present with my wife and children. I'd told myself it was worth it, that I was building something important, that my family would understand and appreciate what I was doing. But they didn't understand. They didn't appreciate it, not because they didn't care about me, but because it simply wasn't part of their lives. The thing that mattered so much to me was completely outside their experience. And why would it be otherwise? I'd been so busy working on it that I'd never really shared it with them. I'd never explained what I was doing or why it mattered to me. I just disappeared into my work and expected them to somehow understand that it was important. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about that moment in the living room. I thought about how animated my kids had been when they talked about their own work, and I realized something. David's software project, Jennifer's counseling work, Rachel's teaching, these were all things that directly affected other people. They could see the impact of their work in real time. David's software made people's jobs easier. Jennifer's counseling helped a suicidal teenager want to live. Rachel's teaching helped a child learn to read. And what had my work done? It had advanced the scholarly understanding of 13th century monastic movements. It had been read by a few hundred academics and cited in their own research. It had contributed to a body of knowledge that existed entirely within university libraries and academic conferences. It mattered. I still believe that, but it mattered in an abstract, removed way that was impossible to explain to people outside that tiny academic world. I'd spent my entire career in a bubble. I'd been so focused on impressing my peers, on publishing in prestigious journals, on building my reputation in my field, that I'd lost sight of the fact that my field was incredibly small and incredibly specialized. The things that brought me professional satisfaction: a positive book review, a citation from another scholar, an invitation to present at a conference. These meant nothing to anyone outside that world. And more importantly, they meant nothing to my family. My wife had supported my work because she loved me, but she'd never really understood what I was doing or why it consumed so much of my time. My children had grown up with a father who was physically present sometimes, but mentally absent most of the time, always thinking about his research, always distracted by some question about medieval monasteries that had nothing to do with their lives. I started looking back at my career differently. I thought about all the moments I'd missed while I was working on that book. I thought about David's high school graduation, where I'd sat in the audience mentally revising a chapter instead of being fully present for my son's achievement. I thought about Jennifer's wedding, where I'd spent half the reception talking to another academic guest about my research instead of dancing with my daughter. I thought about Rachel's struggles in middle school when she'd needed her father's attention and I'd been too busy with a manuscript deadline to really listen. I'd sacrificed presence for accomplishment. I'd traded time with the people who loved me for the approval of people who barely knew me. I'd chosen professional recognition over personal connection. And I'd done it all while telling myself it was important, that it mattered, that I was building something meaningful. But meaningful to whom? That's the question I couldn't escape. My book was meaningful to a handful of medieval history specialists. It was not meaningful to my wife, my children, my grandchildren. It was not meaningful to anyone who would remember me after I died. It was not meaningful in any way. It connected to the actual lived experience of the people I loved. Sharon and I talked about this a few weeks after Thanksgiving. I told her what I'd been thinking, how I'd felt when I realized the kids didn't know about the book. She was quiet for a while, and then she said something that hurt, but was true. She said, "Rich, they don't know about the book because you were never really here when you were working on it. You were always somewhere else, in your head, in your research. We learned not to ask about your work because you'd either talk for an hour about things we didn't understand, or you'd be irritated that we were interrupting your thinking." She wasn't being cruel. She was telling me the truth. I'd been so absorbed in my work that I'd made it clear, without meaning to, that it was more important than anything else. And so my family had learned to leave me alone with it, to not bother me about it, to let me disappear into that other world where Cistercian monasteries and medieval Latin documents were more real than the people sitting at my dinner table. I'm 74 years old now. That book I spent 20 years writing is still on my shelf, and I still believe the research was solid and the conclusions were valid. But I no longer look at it with the same pride I used to feel. Now when I look at it, I think about what it cost me. I think about all the moments I missed while I was chasing professional validation from people who didn't matter as much as I thought they did. My grandchildren have no idea I wrote a book. They know Grandpa was a professor, but they don't know what I taught or what I researched. They know me as the old man who asks them about school and watches their soccer games and reads them stories. And honestly, that's probably a better legacy than any academic publication. If I could go back and do it differently, I would. I'd still do the research, still publish, still take pride in my work. But I'd also be present for my family in a way I wasn't. I'd go to more soccer games and school plays. I'd have more dinners where I was actually engaged in the conversation instead of thinking about my next chapter. I'd recognize that professional accomplishment, no matter how satisfying, is not the same thing as a life well lived. Here's what I want you to understand if you're still in the middle of your career, still building toward something you think will define you. The things you accomplish professionally, the recognition you receive, the achievements you're proudest of, they probably won't matter to the people you love. Not because those people don't care about you, but because they care about you, not your resume. Your children won't remember the awards you won or the projects you completed. They'll remember whether you were there. Your spouse won't be impressed by your professional accomplishments if those accomplishments came at the expense of your relationship. Your legacy isn't what you publish or produce or achieve. Your legacy is how you made the people around you feel. I spent 20 years writing a book that maybe 300 people have read. In that same 20 years, I could have built deeper relationships with my children. I could have been more present with my wife. I could have created memories instead of manuscripts. I could have invested in the things that actually matter instead of chasing the approval of strangers who happen to share my obscure academic interests. At 74, I finally understand that my biggest accomplishment meant nothing to the people I love. And more importantly, I understand that the things that would have meant something to them are the things I neglected while I was working on that accomplishment. The time, the attention, the presence, the genuine interest in their lives, those were the things they needed from me, and those were the things I was too busy to give. It's too late to get those years back. My children are grown, my grandchildren are growing up, and I can't reclaim the time I spent in archives and libraries when I should have been at soccer games and school concerts. But I can tell you, so maybe you'll make different choices than I did. Whatever you're working on, whatever accomplishment you're chasing, ask yourself who it's really for. If it's for your own satisfaction, fine, but be honest about what you're sacrificing to pursue it. If it's for professional recognition, understand that professional recognition is fleeting and ultimately meaningless compared to the relationships you're neglecting. Be present for the people you love. Show up. Pay attention. Invest your time and energy in the things that will matter when you're 74 and looking back at your life. Because I promise you, when you're my age, you won't wish you'd published more papers or won more awards. You'll wish you'd been there for the moments that mattered to the people who mattered to you. I learned that lesson too late. Don't make the same mistake.